I'm Leonard, 32, and Christmas dinner at my mom's house used to be my favorite tradition. This year I spent hours perfecting my grandmother's special casserole recipe, hoping it might finally earn me some approval. As I drove the 3-hour journey with that warm dish carefully balanced on my passenger seat, I felt that familiar mix of hope and dread. Little did I know my carefully prepared dish would be the only food I'd get that night. If you're watching this and have ever felt invisible in your own family, drop a comment about where you're watching from and hit subscribe. Trust me, sometimes the empty plate tells you everything you need to know. Growing up, our family photo albums painted a picture-perfect image: smiling faces at birthday parties, camping trips, and holiday gatherings. But behind those smiles was a different story. My parents divorced when I was 15, turning our supposedly stable household upside down. The split wasn't amicable. It was a battlefield of accusations and resentment that left deep scars on all of us, especially me, the oldest child who understood enough to be hurt but not enough to process it properly. Brian, my younger brother by 5 years, was always the golden child even before the divorce. He had that natural charm that made people gravitate toward him, while I was the awkward, bookish type who preferred taking apart computers to playing football. After our parents split, the contrast in how my mother treated us became impossible to ignore. "Brian needs extra attention right now," she'd explain when he got new sneakers while I wore hand-me-downs. "He's struggling with the divorce," was her justification, when his academic failures were met with understanding, while my achievements were simply expected. I never resented Brian for this. He didn't ask for the preferential treatment. But as years passed, it became clear this wasn't just a temporary adjustment. It was our new normal. After high school, I worked my way through college, earning a degree in computer engineering, while Brian dropped out of 3 different programs before finally completing an associate's degree in business. I secured a good job at a tech firm, bought my own condo, and built what most would consider a successful life. Meanwhile, Brian moved from one startup idea to another, always with our mother's emotional and financial backing. "Your brother is an entrepreneur," she'd say proudly, as if my stable career was somehow less impressive than Brian's series of failed ventures. "He takes risks just like your father used to." It was one of her rare mentions of our father, who had moved across the country and started a new family, gradually becoming a stranger to us both. Despite everything, I kept trying to maintain a relationship with my mother. Every birthday card, sent every holiday visit, made every phone call answered, was an attempt to bridge the gap between us. I convinced myself that someday she'd see me, really see me, and realize I deserved just as much love and recognition as Brian. This hope, however thin, kept me coming back year after year. Then Ashley entered our family dynamic 3 years ago. Brian met her at a networking event, and within months she was a fixture at family gatherings. My mother was instantly enchanted by her confidence and ambition. Ashley, with her marketing degree and carefully cultivated social media presence, was everything my mother wished for in a daughter-in-law. "She's going places," my mother would whisper to me, as if imparting some great secret, "and she's helping Brian focus. They're perfect together." I nodded and smiled, swallowing the bitter observation that my own accomplishments were never discussed with such enthusiasm. During this time, I remained single. My last serious relationship had ended 8 months prior, when Stephanie took a job in Seattle. We tried long distance, but eventually the strain became too much. My mother never failed to remind me that at 32, I was falling behind in the life partner department. "You work too much," she'd diagnose over the phone. "Women want a man with ambition, but not one who has no time for them." The irony that she celebrated Brian's work-obsessed lifestyle while criticizing mine was apparently lost on her. This Christmas, I was determined to make a positive impression. My grandmother, my father's mother, had been the one person who always made me feel valued growing up. Her special holiday casserole was legendary in our family, a rich combination of potatoes, cheese, and secret seasonings that she'd brought from her homeland. Before she passed away 5 years ago, she had given me her recipe box, a treasure trove of culinary knowledge that my mother had shown no interest in. "You have her hands," Grandma had told me once, as she taught me to knead dough. "Steady and patient, good cooking hands." It was one of the few compliments about myself that I fully believed. I spent weeks practicing the casserole, making adjustments until it tasted exactly like I remembered. The process was therapeutic, connecting me to Grandma's memory, while giving me something tangible to contribute to the family gathering. In my mind, I imagined the scene, my mother taking a bite, her expression softening as memories of family dinners past washed over her. Perhaps this shared experience, this taste of history, might finally create a bridge between us. So on Christmas morning, I woke up early, put the final touches on my casserole, and carefully placed it in my car. The 3-hour drive from my city apartment to my childhood hometown gave me plenty of time to rehearse conversations and steel myself for the usual subtle digs about my personal life. Snow dusted the highway as I drove, transforming the landscape into something magical, reinforcing my hopes that this Christmas might be different from all the others. The string of multicolored lights lining my mother's rooftop came into view as I turned onto our old street. The same plastic reindeer had occupied the front lawn for as long as I could remember, their once vibrant colors now faded from years of winter exposure. 2 cars already sat in the driveway, Brian's sleek new SUV that my mother had helped finance, and an unfamiliar sedan that I assumed belonged to Ashley. Balancing the warm casserole dish carefully, I made my way up the salt-sprinkled walkway. Before I could knock, the door swung open, revealing my mother in a festive red sweater, her face already alight with the smile she reserved for special occasions. "Oh, they're here," she called over her shoulder before registering that it was me, not whoever she had been expecting. Her expression shifted subtly. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but I'd become an expert in reading these minute changes. "Leonard, you made it. Come in, it's freezing out there." There was no hug, no warm embrace like I'd seen in countless Christmas movies. Instead, she stepped aside, gesturing me in with a quick wave. The living room was a showcase of holiday spirit. A 7-foot tree dominated the corner, adorned with ornaments collected over decades, many of which I recognized from childhood. A fire crackled in the hearth, and the air was rich with the scents of pine, cinnamon, and roasting turkey. Brian and Ashley sat on the sofa, matching Christmas sweaters, making them look like an advertisement for holiday romance. They were huddled over Ashley's phone, laughing at something on the screen. "Look who's finally here," my mother announced, drawing their attention. Brian glanced up, offering a casual nod. "Hey bro, thought you might have gotten lost." His tone was light but carried that familiar edge of superiority. Ashley, perfect smile in place, added, "We were just about to place bets on whether you'd make it before dinner." "Traffic was actually pretty good," I replied, forcing a smile. "I made Grandma's casserole." I lifted the dish slightly, hoping someone might acknowledge the effort. My mother's eyes barely flickered to the casserole. "Oh, how nice. You can put it in the kitchen. We have plenty of food already, but I'm sure we can find space for it." Plenty of food already. The words stung more than they should have. The kitchen counter was indeed crowded with dishes, a massive turkey resting under foil bowls of stuffing, mashed potatoes, green bean, casserole, cranberry sauce, and 3 different pies for dessert. I found a small space at the end of the counter for my contribution. As I returned to the living room, the doorbell rang again. This time, my mother rushed to answer with genuine enthusiasm. "They're here," she exclaimed, flinging the door open to welcome my Aunt Mary, Uncle Robert, and Cousin Patrick. Hugs were exchanged all around, my mother clinging to Mary for several seconds longer than she had even acknowledged me. "Something smells amazing," Helen Uncle Robert commented, removing his coat. "I've been cooking since 6 this morning," my mother replied proudly. "And Ashley made her special cranberry sauce. Wait until you taste it, it's divine." No mention of my casserole, of course. The conversation flowed around me as everyone settled in. Brian dominated the discussion with stories of his latest business venture, something involving social media marketing that, according to him, was revolutionizing the industry. Ashley chimed in with perfectly timed, supportive comments, while my mother beamed at them both like they were announcing a cure for cancer rather than another dubious startup. "And what about you, Leonard, still at that same company?" Aunt Mary asked during a rare lull. Before I could answer, my mother jumped in. "Leonard's very consistent." "Aren't you, dear? Same job for what, 8 years now?" "6, I corrected gently. "And I was actually promoted to senior systems architect last month." "That's wonderful," Uncle Robert said, genuinely impressed. "Must come with quite a responsibility bump." I nodded, about to elaborate, when Brian interjected, "Yeah, but he's still single. All work and no play, right, Leo?" The nickname he knew I hated since childhood. Not everyone needs to be coupled up, I responded, trying to keep my tone light. My work is challenging and fulfilling. But so lonely, my mother added with a theatrical sigh. At your age, I was already raising 2 boys. Times are different now, Helen, Aunt Mary said, shooting me a sympathetic glance. Many people focus on their careers first these days. The conversation mercifully shifted to Cousin Patrick's graduate studies, giving me a moment to compose myself. I noticed Ashley whispering something in my mother's ear, causing both to giggle conspiratorially. Oh, before I forget, my mother announced, standing up. Ashley, I made your favorite chocolate pecan pie for dessert. I remembered how much you loved it last year. Ashley clapped her hands in delight. That's so thoughtful of you, Helen. You remembered. The irony wasn't lost on me. For my 30th birthday, my mother had served lemon meringue pie, despite knowing I was allergic to citrus since childhood. When I reminded her, she'd simply said, "Oh, that's right. Well, there's ice cream in the freezer." As we continued catching up, I noticed more subtle signs of preference. My mother had placed family photos around the room, including several recent additions. Brian and Ashley featured prominently, their smiling faces captured at various outings and events. There was even a framed photo of them with my mother at a restaurant, all 3 raising wine glasses in a toast. I appeared in exactly one photo, a faded family portrait taken before the divorce, partially obscured by a decorative candle. These observations settled in my stomach like stones, weighing me down as the afternoon progressed. Still, I maintained my smile, asked appropriate questions, and played my part in this holiday performance. The casserole sitting in the kitchen represented my last hope for connection, a tangible piece of our shared family history that might bridge the widening gap between my mother and me. Dinner's ready. My mother's announcement sent everyone moving toward the dining room, where the large oak table had been transformed into a holiday showcase. A red and green tablecloth lay beneath elegant china plates, the special set that emerged only for important occasions. Crystal glasses caught the light from the chandelier above, which had been adorned with sprigs of holly. Cloth napkins folded into fan shapes waited beside polished silverware, and a centerpiece of pine branches, cinnamon sticks, and glittering ornaments ran down the table's middle. The scene was picture perfect, like something from a Christmas catalog. My mother had always prided herself on presentation. Appearances matter, she'd remind us growing up usually, while forcing me to change into something more appropriate for company. Uncle Robert whistled appreciatively. Helen, you've outdone yourself this year. This looks spectacular. My mother beamed under the praise, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from the tablecloth. Well, Christmas only comes once a year. I wanted it to be special. The food procession from kitchen to dining room began. My mother carried in the golden brown turkey on a massive serving platter, placing it ceremoniously at the head of the table where she would sit. Brian followed with the bowl of mashed potatoes, while Ashley brought her cranberry sauce, announcing, "Made with orange zest," and a hint of cinnamon to appreciative murmurs. I moved to bring in my casserole, but my mother intercepted me. "Leonard, be a dear, and help Patrick bring in the chairs from the living room. We need 2 more." By the time I'd arranged the extra seating, most of the food had been transferred to the table. My casserole was noticeably absent. I returned to the kitchen and found it still sitting on the counter untouched. "Should I bring in the casserole?" I asked my mother as she filled a gravy boat. She glanced at the dish with slight irritation. "Oh, there's hardly any room left on the table, maybe for seconds if anyone's still hungry." The message was clear: my contribution was an afterthought, not part of the real meal. Still, I carried it in anyway, placing it on a side table near the dining area. Uncle Robert noticed and commented, "Is that Margaret's famous potato casserole? I haven't had that in years." "Leonard made it, my mother," replied her tone, suggesting this fact diminished its value somehow. Really, Aunt Mary looked genuinely impressed. She never shared that recipe with anyone. "How wonderful that you're carrying on the tradition, Leonard." For a brief moment I felt a small victory, until my mother added, "Well, it's not exactly the same, of course. Nobody could replicate Margaret's cooking." As everyone took their seats, I noticed the careful arrangement. My mother at the head of the table with Brian and Ashley to her immediate right. Aunt Mary, Uncle Robert, and Cousin Patrick sat along the other side. There was one empty chair at the far end, presumably for me, the furthest possible position from my mother. What happened next still plays in my mind with painful clarity. My mother stood at her place, assuming the role of hostess with practiced ease. Before we start, I want to thank everyone for being here. Family means everything, especially at Christmas. Her gaze swept the table, lingering on Brian and Ashley with undisguised affection. She began serving, starting with the turkey. Brian's plate received a generous portion of white meat, his preference since childhood. Ashley was next then, Aunt Mary, Uncle Robert, and Patrick. Each plate was carefully prepared, with my mother adding personal touches. Extra gravy for Robert, no stuffing for Mary, who watched her carbs, a little of everything for Patrick. When all 5 plates had been filled and distributed, my mother sat down smiling at everyone. "Please start while it's hot." I remained empty-handed, staring at the blank space before me. The oversight was so blatant that it created an awkward tension around the table. Uncle Robert cleared his throat but didn't speak. Aunt Mary glanced between me and my mother with confusion. Finally, Patrick broke the silence. "Aunt Helen, I think you forgot Leonard's plate." My mother looked up, her expression momentarily blank before morphing into mild surprise. "Oh, I'm sorry, Leonard. I think we've run short on turkey." She surveyed the platter, which still held significant portions of both white and dark meat. "There's not really enough for a full serving." The statement was so obviously false that I almost laughed. Instead, I kept my voice steady. "That's okay. There seems to be plenty of side dishes left." "Of course, help yourself," she replied, her tone suggesting she was being exceptionally generous. Though the mashed potatoes are nearly gone, Brian and Ashley love them so much. The bowl of mashed potatoes was still half full. I reached for the serving spoons and quietly assembled a meager plate for myself, a small piece of turkey from what remained modest portions of stuffing and green beans, and yes, mashed potatoes from the supposedly depleted bowl. "No cranberry sauce for you, Leonard?" Ashley asked, her voice sweet but her eyes challenging. "It's really good if I do say so myself." "I'm sure it is," I replied neutrally, taking a small spoonful to avoid creating further tension. As everyone began eating, the conversation resumed. Brian launched into a detailed explanation of his new business venture's potential revenue streams, with Ashley adding polished marketing phrases at regular intervals. My mother listened with rapt attention, occasionally touching Brian's arm in maternal pride. "We're projecting 6-figure returns within the first 2 quarters, Brian announced, cutting into his turkey with flourish. "That's impressive," Uncle Robert said, though I caught the skepticism in his tone. As a successful accountant, he'd likely heard plenty of optimistic business projections over the years. "Leonard, how's your job going?" Aunt Mary asked once again, attempting to include me. I had barely opened my mouth to respond when my mother interjected, "Oh, Leonard's company is very stable, very predictable." She made it sound like a character flaw. I took a bite of my grandmother's casserole, the only abundant food on my plate, and found small comfort in the familiar flavors of childhood. At least this one thing had turned out right. "This casserole is excellent," Uncle Robert said, having helped himself to a serving despite my mother's attempts to minimize it. "Tastes just like Margaret used to make." "You've got her touch, Leonard." "Thank you," I replied, genuinely appreciative of the recognition. "It's a bit heavy on the pepper for my taste," my mother commented, though she hadn't taken a single bite. And so the meal continued, me picking at my inadequate portions, while watching everyone else enjoy the abundant feast, jumping into conversations only to be talked over, and trying to ignore the growing knot of hurt and anger in my wide chest. The food, despite my hunger, tasted like ashes. The dinner conversation flowed around me like water around a stone, present but untouching. I focused on making my modest portions last, cutting smaller pieces, chewing longer, creating the illusion of participation in this family feast. Uncle Robert had kindly passed me more green beans when my mother wasn't looking, a small act of rebellion that hadn't gone unnoticed by Ashley, who raised an eyebrow but said nothing. So my mother said, placing her fork down with theatrical precision, "Brian and Ashley have some exciting news to share." All eyes turned toward the couple. Brian straightened in his seat, wrapping an arm around Ashley's shoulders with practiced casualness. "We weren't going to say anything until after the holidays," he began, his voice taking on the same tone he used for business presentations, "but since the whole family is here." Ashley extended her left hand, wiggling her fingers dramatically to draw attention to the absence of a ring. "We're officially pre-engaged." "Pre-engaged," Patrick echoed, confusion evident. "It means we're planning to get engaged," Ashley explained as though speaking to a child. "We're looking at rings next month, and Brian is planning the perfect proposal for Valentine's Day." My mother clasped her hands together in delight. "Isn't that wonderful? My Brian finally settling down with the perfect girl." The table erupted with obligatory congratulations. I offered a smile and nod that I hoped appeared genuine. In truth, I was happy for my brother. Despite our differences, I'd never wished him ill. If Ashley made him happy, then I was glad for them both. "We're thinking a June wedding next year," Ashley continued. "Nothing too extravagant, just 200 of our closest friends and family at the Lakeside Resort." The Lakeside Resort was the most expensive venue in the county, known for weddings that started at $30,000. Nothing too extravagant indeed. "It's going to be beautiful," my mother gushed. "And don't you worry about the cost. I've been saving for Brian's wedding day since he was little. I can contribute $20,000 to give you the celebration you deserve." The words hit me like a physical blow. 2 years earlier, when I was trying to launch a small software startup, I'd asked my mother for a loan of $15,000. I'd had a business plan, potential clients lined up, everything meticulously prepared. Her response had been immediate and firm. "I'm sorry, Leonard, but I just don't have that kind of money to risk. You understand, don't you?" I'd accepted her answer without argument, working extra consulting jobs on weekends, until I'd saved enough to bootstrap the venture myself. The company had been moderately successful before I eventually sold it to a larger firm for a comfortable profit. A fact my mother had acknowledged with a dismissive, "That's nice, dear." And now here she was, casually offering $20,000 for a single day's celebration. "That's incredibly generous, Mom," Brian said, though his tone suggested he'd expected nothing less. "Well, what else would I spend it on?" she replied with a laugh. "It's not like I have other children getting married anytime soon." Her gaze flickered toward me for a split second, long enough to make her point. I focused intensely on cutting a piece of turkey, willing my expression to remain neutral. The conversation continued around me, wedding details expanding to fill every available space. Color schemes, flower arrangements, potential honeymoon destinations. Ashley had clearly been planning this long before their pre-engagement announcement. "More mashed potatoes, please," Ashley said, holding out her already cleaned plate. "They're absolutely divine, Helen." My mother beamed, taking the plate. "Of course, dear. There's plenty." She heaped a generous second serving onto Ashley's plate, far more than she'd given me for my first portion. And there it was, the moment when all pretense fell away. There hadn't been not enough food. My mother hadn't forgotten my plate. These were conscious choices, small cruelties stacked like bricks to form a wall between us. A memory surfaced: my 10th birthday, when my requested chocolate cake had mysteriously transformed into Brian's favorite vanilla because the bakery made a mistake. Another followed high school graduation, when my mother had left halfway through because Brian, then 13, had a soccer match. Then college acceptance letters, my scholarship to MIT, acknowledged with a distracted "that's nice," while Brian's admission to the local community college warranted a celebratory dinner. "Leonard's always been the serious one," my mother was saying now, apparently in the middle of some story about our childhood. "Even as a baby, he rarely smiled. Brian was the opposite. Always laughing, always the life of the party. Some people are just born with sunnier dispositions," Ashley added sagely, as though she were a child psychologist rather than someone who'd never even met me as a child. Brian chuckled. "Yeah, Leo needs to lighten up sometimes. Everything's always so dramatic with him." "I'm sitting right here," I said quietly, the words escaping before I could stop them. A brief, uncomfortable silence fell over the table. "See what I mean?" Brian laughed, breaking the tension. "So sensitive. It's just a joke, bro." Ashley nodded in agreement. "You really should learn to take things less personally, Leonard. Life's too short to be so serious all the time." The advice might have been easier to accept from someone who hadn't just spent 15 minutes discussing the critical importance of choosing the right shade of napkins for her wedding reception. "Leonard's always been this way," my mother added, her tone a mixture of exasperation and faux concern. "He takes after his father's side. They're all so intense." Another memory, my father walking out the door for the last time, my mother's voice following him. "You've never appreciated anything I've done for this family. Nothing is ever good enough for you." The same words she'd used on me countless times since. I looked down at my nearly empty plate, then at Ashley's overflowing second, helping then at my mother's deliberately averted gaze. Something shifted inside me, a foundation cracking, after bearing too much weight for too long. In that moment, with perfect clarity, I understood that nothing would ever change. No achievement, no effort, no family casserole would ever bridge the gap between us. I would always be the afterthought, the obligation, the box to check off so she could tell herself she treated both sons equally. And for the first time in my adult life, I asked myself, why am I still trying? The realization settled over me like a strange calm after years of emotional turbulence. All this time I'd been searching for approval from someone fundamentally incapable of giving it to me. Each holiday, each phone call, each attempted connection had been another coin tossed into a wishing well that had run dry long ago. Around me, the conversation continued unabated. Ashley was describing her ideal wedding dress in excruciating detail, my mother hanging on every word as if she were revealing the secrets of the universe. Brian interjected occasionally with comments about cost, each time receiving assurances from my mother that we'll make it work. I placed my napkin beside my plate and quietly stood up. The movement was careful, controlled, not the angry pushback from the table I might have executed in my younger days. This wasn't about making a scene. This was about finally respecting myself enough to walk away. It took several moments for anyone to notice. Uncle Robert was the first, his eyes meeting mine with a question in them. I gave him a small, reassuring nod. "Leonard," Aunt Mary finally asked, "is everything okay?" The conversation halted, all eyes turning toward me with varying degrees of interest and annoyance. "I'm fine," I said simply. "Please continue your meal." I moved toward the kitchen, my steps measured and deliberate. Behind me I heard my mother's confused voice. "Where are you going? We haven't had dessert yet." In the kitchen I located the glass container that held what remained of my grandmother's casserole. The dish was still half full, most of the family having opted for my mother's offerings instead. I carefully placed the lid on top and picked it up. When I returned to the dining room doorway, container in hand, my mother's expression shifted from confusion to indignation. "What are you doing with that?" she demanded. "I'm heading out," I replied, keeping my voice even. "Thank you for dinner." Leaving, her voice rose slightly. "In the middle of Christmas dinner, without dessert. I need to get on the road before the snow gets worse." I explained, though we all knew the forecast called for clear skies. Brian scoffed audibly. "Seriously, Leo, Mom spent all day cooking and you're just going to bail?" I looked at my brother, really looked at him, and saw not the golden child who could do no wrong, but a man who had never had to earn his place at the table, who had never known what it felt like to be an afterthought in his own family. For the first time I felt something close to pity for him. "The dinner was lovely," I said, addressing everyone but looking at no one in particular. "Merry Christmas to you all." "You can't just leave," my mother protested, standing now. "What about the gifts? What about family time?" "This is so rude," Ashley added, her perfect features arranged in an expression of practiced offense. "Helen went to all this trouble, and you're just walking out." This is exactly what I was talking about. Always making everything about yourself. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't made accusations. I had simply stood up and prepared to leave with dignity. Yet somehow I was the one causing a scene. "Leonard has always been difficult during the holidays," my mother told the table at large as though I weren't present. "Ever since he was little, nothing is ever good enough." The irony might have made me laugh if it weren't so painful. "I'm not being difficult," I said quietly. "I'm just ready to go home. After the way you've been pouting all evening because I forgot to give you turkey first. Don't think I didn't notice your attitude." My mother continued, her voice taking on the wounded tone I knew so well. "I try so hard to make these gatherings special, and you always find some way to ruin them. In past years, this would have been the moment I capitulated. I would have apologized, put the casserole back, returned to my seat at the far end of the table, and endured another 2 hours of subtle slights and overlooked contributions. I would have driven home later that night, feeling hollow, telling myself that next time would be different. Next time I would finally earn my place. But not tonight. I didn't get turkey at all, Mom, I stated calmly. You said there wasn't enough while giving Ashley seconds. Just like you said you couldn't afford to help with my business, but you can give Brian $20,000 for a wedding. It's a pattern and we all know it. The room went silent. My mother's face cycled through shock, anger, and finally settled on hurt, her most effective weapon. How dare you, she whispered. After everything I've done for you, I raised you alone after your father abandoned us. I put food on the table, I kept a roof over your head, and this is how you repay me, by embarrassing me in front of our family on Christmas. I'm not trying to embarrass anyone, I replied, suddenly tired of the entire performance. I'm just done pretending. Merry Christmas, everyone. I turned toward the front door, casserole in hand. Behind me, chairs scraped against hardwood as people either stood in protest or simply shifted uncomfortably. Leonard, wait, Uncle Robert called. Don't leave like this. I paused, hand on the doorknob. I'm sorry, Uncle Robert. I need to go. If you walk out that door, don't bother coming back next year, my mother declared, her voice quavering with what anyone else might have mistaken for emotion rather than calculation. I won't have my Christmas ruined again. I looked back one last time, taking in the scene, my mother standing dramatically at the head of the table, Brian and Ashley presenting a unified front of disapproval, Aunt Mary and Uncle Robert looking torn, cousin Patrick staring intensely at his plate to avoid making eye contact with anyone. Goodbye, I said simply, and stepped outside into the cold December air. As I carefully placed the casserole on the passenger seat of my car, the front door opened again. I tensed, preparing for another confrontation, but it was Uncle Robert who emerged hastily, shrugging into his coat. Leonard, he called, hurrying down the walkway. Hold on a second. I waited, keys in hand, as he approached. You okay, son? He asked, his breath forming clouds in the frosty air. I will be, I answered honestly. He nodded, shoving his hands into his pockets. Your grandmother would be proud of that casserole. Tasted just like hers. Thank you, I said, unexpected emotion tightening my throat. Look, your mother is. He trailed off, searching for diplomatic words. She's complicated. Always has been, even when we were kids. But what just happened in there wasn't right. You know that, right? I nodded, unwilling to trust my voice. Give it some time, he advised. But don't let this eat at you. You're a good man, Leonard. More like your grandmother than anyone else in the family. Coming from Uncle Robert, who had adored his mother-in-law, this was high praise indeed. Merry Christmas, he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. Drive safe, you hear? You too, I managed the simple kindness, nearly undoing my composure. As I drove away from my childhood home, the casserole dish still warm against my leg, I felt something unexpected relief. Not happiness, not victory, certainly not joy, but the profound relief of putting down a burden I'd carried for far too long. The first message arrived before I'd even reached the highway. My phone, connected to my car's Bluetooth system, announced, new text from Brian. I ignored it, focusing on the road ahead as snow began to fall in light flurries. 5 minutes later, new text, from Mom, then another, and another. I turned the phone to silent and switched on the radio. Johnny Mathis sang about chestnuts roasting on an open fire. The cheerful melody, a surreal contrast to my emotional state. I wasn't angry anymore. The white-hot frustration had cooled into something more solid and enduring resolution. The 3-hour drive home gave me ample time to reflect. Each mile put between myself and that dining room table felt like a physical unburdening. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex, the snow was falling, steadily transforming the urban landscape into something softer, newer. Inside, I placed the casserole dish on my kitchen counter and finally checked my phone. 8 text messages and 3 missed calls awaited my attention. From Brian Way to Ruin Christmas Leo. Mom's crying now. Hope you're happy. From Mom, I can't believe you would embarrass me like this. After everything I've done for you, call me immediately. From Mom again, your behavior was completely unacceptable. Brian and Ashley are shocked. Is this how I raised you to act? From Brian again, Ashley says this is why you're still single. No woman wants a man who throws tantrums. I scrolled through the remaining messages, variations on the same themes of guilt, accusation, and emotional manipulation. Nothing new, nothing I hadn't heard before in different forms throughout my life. What did surprise me were the other messages that followed. From Uncle Robert, check the weather report. Roads look clear, but drive carefully. Call if you need anything. From Patrick, hey, 'cause dinner got weird after you left. Aunt Helen kept talking about ungrateful children for like an hour. Uncle Robert finally told her to drop it. Think he's in the doghouse now, too. Your casserole was bomb, by the way. And most unexpectedly from Aunt Mary Leonard, I hope you arrived home safely. I want you to know that your feelings are valid. We all noticed what happened tonight. Call me tomorrow if you'd like to talk. Love you, dear. I sat on my sofa rereading Aunt Mary's message several times. Your feelings are valid. Such a simple phrase, yet it struck me with unexpected force. How long had I been dismissing my own reactions as oversensitivity? How many times had I accepted the narrative that I was the difficult one, the problem child who couldn't just be grateful and keep the peace? My phone rang, breaking the silence. The screen showed my best friend Mike's name, not family, but someone who had been more supportive than most blood relations in my life. Merry Christmas, man, he greeted when I answered. How was the annual Helen show? Mike had coined the term years ago, after hearing too many stories about my family dynamics. He'd never met my mother, but he had an uncanny ability to predict her behaviors. I left early, I admitted. Actually, I walked out during dinner. A low whistle came through the speaker. Wow, what happened? I recounted the evening's events, from the missing plate to Ashley's seconds from the wedding money to my quiet departure. As I spoke, the reality of what I'd done, standing up for myself after decades of acquiescence, began to sink in. It's about damn time, Mike said when I finished. Leonard, I've been telling you for years that this relationship is toxic. You keep going back, expecting different results, and it's painful to watch, man. I know, I acknowledged. I just always thought if I tried hard enough, if I achieved enough, eventually she'd see you value. You treat you with basic human decency. Mike finished for me. That's not how it works with people like your mom. The problem was never you. We talked for nearly an hour, Mike offering the perspective of someone who hadn't been raised to think that maternal love was something you had to earn through constant performance. After hanging up, I heated a portion of the casserole and ate it slowly, savoring the familiar flavors that connected me to my grandmother. She had loved me unconditionally, had seen me clearly when others looked past. I wished she were here now, though I suspected she would simply say she had been waiting for me to stand up for myself all along. Christmas night passed quietly. I watched a movie, answered emails from friends wishing me happy holidays, and went to bed early. The sense of peace that had begun on the drive home deepened into something approaching contentment. For the first time in years, I hadn't spent Christmas evening replaying every criticism, every slight, every moment I had failed to measure up. Morning brought a call from my mother. I let it go to voicemail, then listened with a strange detachment as her voice shifted between anger and tearful recrimination. How could you do this to me? She demanded. You've ruined everyone's Christmas. Brian and Ashley are devastated. Is that what you wanted, to punish everyone because you're jealous of your brother's happiness? Call me back immediately so we can discuss your behavior. I didn't call back. Instead, I texted a simple response. I need some time. I'll reach out when I'm ready to talk. Her reply was immediate. This is exactly the kind of selfishness I'm talking about. Families don't take time. They work through their issues together. The irony of being lectured about selfishness by someone who couldn't be bothered to prepare a plate for her own son wasn't lost on me. I didn't respond further. Later that afternoon, Aunt Mary called. Her voice was warm, concerned without being intrusive. I've been thinking about you since last night, she said. Are you all right? I'm better than I expected, I admitted. Calmer. Good, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. You know, watching what happened at dinner, it reminded me of things I've seen Helen do over the years. The way she treated you versus Brian. The way she treated your father before the divorce. My father, I hadn't expected this turn in the conversation. Aunt Mary sighed. Your mother and I are very different people, Leonard. We always have been, even as children. Helen needs to be the center of attention, needs to control the narrative. Your father challenged that. And you remind her too much of him. Independent, thoughtful, not easily manipulated. Is that why she favors Brian? I asked the question that had haunted me since childhood finally spoken aloud. Brian is easier for her, Aunt Mary replied diplomatically. He needs her approval in a way you never did. That makes her comfortable. We spoke for nearly an hour, Aunt Mary sharing perspectives and family history I'd never heard before. Not excusing my mother's behavior, but contextualizing it in ways that helped me understand her issues had never been about me. They were patterns established long before my birth cycles repeated, because no one had ever firmly broken them. What do I do now? I asked finally. Set boundaries, Aunt Mary advised. Clear ones, and be prepared to enforce them consistently. Helen won't change overnight, if at all, but you can change how you respond to her. After we hung up, I wrote down some thoughts about what healthy boundaries might look like. No more accepting blame for others' emotions. No more pretending the favoritism didn't exist. No more showing up to be ignored or belittled for the sake of family harmony. The days between Christmas and New Year's passed in a strange new reality. My mother called daily, each voicemail oscillating between guilt trips and demands. Brian texted occasional barbs designed to make me feel like the villain. I responded to neither, focusing instead on my own well-being. Uncle Robert checked in every evening with brief supportive messages. Patrick sent memes that made me laugh despite everything. And most surprisingly, several extended family members I rarely spoke to reached out after apparently hearing about the Christmas dinner incident. Aunt Helen has always played favorites, my second cousin Julia wrote. We've all seen it for years. Good for you for finally saying something. With each message, each conversation, my perspective shifted. What had initially felt like a personal failure, my inability to secure my mother's love and approval, gradually revealed itself as something entirely different, a system designed to keep me seeking validation that would never come. A game I could never win because the rules changed whenever I got close. The realization was both painful and liberating. If approval was impossible to earn, why keep sacrificing my dignity trying? If unconditional love wasn't available from my mother, why not focus on the relationships where it was freely given? By New Year's Eve, I had declined Brian's grudging invitation to sort things out before the engagement party refused my mother's demand to put this nonsense behind us, and instead accepted Mike's invitation to a small gathering at his apartment with friends who genuinely enjoyed my company. As I prepared to leave for the evening, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. The man looking back at me seemed different somehow, standing straighter, expression more relaxed. Not magically healed of decades of emotional wounds, but finally facing in a new direction, forward, not back. The snow had stopped falling by New Year's Eve, leaving Boston wrapped in a crisp blanket of white that gleamed under streetlights as I made my way to Mike's apartment. His fourth-floor walk-up was already buzzing with conversation and laughter when I arrived. The door flung open by Mike himself, wearing a ridiculous glitter-covered top hat. The man of the hour, he announced, pulling me into a quick embrace before ushering me inside. Everyone, this is Leonard, the guy I told you about who finally stood up to the dragon lady. I laughed, embarrassed but also touched by his enthusiasm. You've been talking about me. Only good things, assured Daniela, Mike's girlfriend of 2 years. She handed me a glass of champagne. Seriously though, what you did took courage. We're all impressed. The apartment was filled with about 15 people. Some I knew well, others I'd met only once or twice at previous gatherings. Yet as the evening progressed, I felt more at ease, more authentically seen and heard than I had in years of family holidays. No one interrupted me mid-sentence. No one compared my achievements unfavorably to someone else's. No one made me feel like my presence was merely tolerated rather than welcomed. At Mike's insistence, I'd brought along what remained of my grandmother's casserole, reheated and transferred to a serving dish. Unlike at Christmas dinner, it was received with genuine enthusiasm. "This is amazing," declared Jason, a software developer from Mike's company. "What's in this again?" "Family secret," I replied with a smile, feeling my grandmother's presence in the moment. "But the key is using 3 different kinds of cheese." "You should open a restaurant," Daniela suggested, helping herself to seconds without any passive-aggressive commentary about portion sizes. As midnight approached, conversation turned reflective. People shared their highs and lows from the past year, their hopes for the one about to begin. When my turn came, I surprised myself with my answer. This year I learned that family isn't just who you're related to, I said, looking around at the warm, accepting faces surrounding me. It's who makes room for you at their table, without making you feel like you're taking up too much space. The words resonated more deeply than I'd expected, drawing nods of understanding and raised glasses in agreement. As the countdown began, and we all prepared to welcome the new year, I felt a profound sense of belonging that had nothing to do with shared DNA and everything to do with shared respect. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Another text from Brian. I ignored it, focusing instead on the moment at hand, on the genuine connections surrounding me. The first weeks of January brought expected challenges. My mother's approach evolved from angry demands to wounded victimhood. "I don't understand why you're punishing me," her latest voicemail lamented. "I've always tried to be a good mother. If I've done something wrong, you need to tell me directly instead of this silent treatment." The old Leonard would have called back immediately, apologizing and accepting blame for the entire situation. The new Leonard recognized the pattern for what it was, a bid for control rather than genuine interest in my feelings. Instead, I composed a careful email outlining my experience at Christmas dinner and the larger pattern it represented. I explained that I needed space and time to reassess our relationship, and that any future contact would need to be based on mutual respect rather than the dynamic we'd established over decades. Her response was predictable denial, followed by counter-accusations, followed by the insistence that I was too sensitive and imagining things. Brian chimed in with his own email, explaining that I had always been jealous of his relationship with our mother and needed to grow up and get over it. What wasn't predictable was my reaction. Instead of the familiar cycle of doubt, guilt, and eventual capitulation, I felt calm certainty. Their responses only confirmed what I now knew to be true. This wasn't about a single dinner or a forgotten plate. It was about a fundamental inability to see me as a person with valid feelings and legitimate needs. By late January, an unexpected email arrived from Ashley. The subject line read simply, "Wedding invitation decision. Leonard." It began with uncharacteristic directness. "Brian and I are finalizing our guest list for June. Given recent events, we need to know if you're planning to attend or if you're still holding your grudge. Your mother is very upset about the family situation, and we don't want any drama at our special day. Please let us know your decision by the end of the week." I considered the implied ultimatum: attend the wedding, pretend nothing had happened, and resume the familiar role of overlooked older brother, or decline and be labeled the villain who couldn't set aside his grudge for his brother's special day. After careful thought, I replied Ashley and Brian, "I wish you both happiness in your marriage. I would be open to attending your wedding under one condition: an acknowledgement and sincere apology from both you and my mother regarding the events at Christmas and the pattern of behavior it represented. Without that, I don't think my presence would be positive for anyone involved. The choice is yours, and I will respect whatever you decide." The response was immediate and hostile, with Brian calling my conditions selfish and manipulative. Ashley followed up with a separate email suggesting I needed therapy for my obvious issues with women in authority positions. I forwarded both emails to Mike, who responded with a single line: "Congratulations, you're officially breaking the cycle." February brought an unexpected ally. Uncle Robert called one evening as I was leaving work. "Just checking in," he said casually. "How are things?" "Better," I answered honestly. "Different, but better." "Good to hear," he replied. "Listen, Mary and I wanted you to know. We've declined Brian's wedding invitation." The news stunned me. "You what? Why?" "After Christmas, and the way they've handled things since. We've had some conversations with Helen about her behavior over the years. It didn't go well." He chuckled without humor. "Mary tried to explain how she's treated you compared to Brian. Helen refused to hear it. When we suggested family counseling, she accused us of taking sides. I'm sorry," I said, genuinely regretful that my situation had created a rift between the siblings. "Don't be," he insisted. "This has been brewing for decades. Your grandmother, Mary and Helen's mother, always worried about Helen's inability to self-reflect. She'd be proud of you for finally standing your ground. By March, I had begun seeing Sarah, a project manager I'd met through a work conference. Our connection was immediate and natural conversation, flowing easily from professional topics to personal interests and eventually to family backgrounds. My parents divorced when I was 12, she shared over dinner on our third date. My dad remarried right away and basically started a replacement family. For years, I kept trying to earn his attention, thinking if I just achieved enough, he'd finally make room for me. The parallels to my own experience were striking. What changed, I asked. Therapy, she answered with a smile. Lots and lots of therapy. Eventually, I realized his limitations weren't my failure. Once I stopped expecting him to be something he couldn't be, I could appreciate what he could offer without being destroyed when he fell short. Her candor and self-awareness were refreshing. At her gentle encouragement, I began seeing a therapist myself, gradually unpacking the complex web of expectations and disappointments that had defined my relationship with my mother. What you're describing is a classic pattern in families with narcissistic dynamics, Dr. Marcus explained during one session. The golden child versus the scapegoat. Neither role is actually healthy for the child in question. Even Brian, I asked, surprised. He always seemed to benefit from the situation. Being the golden child creates its own prison, he replied thoughtfully. Brian's sense of worth is entirely dependent on your mother's approval. That's a precarious position that often leads to underdeveloped independence and difficulty establishing healthy relationships outside the family system. The perspective shift was profound. For the first time, I could see my brother not as my mother's favored competitor, but as someone trapped in a different aspect of the same dysfunctional system. The realization didn't excuse his behavior, but it helped me release some of the resentment I'd carried for years. By June, the month of Brian's wedding, I had established a new normal, weekly therapy sessions, a promising relationship with Sarah, who understood family complexity firsthand, regular dinners with Mike and Daniela, occasional calls with Uncle Robert and Aunt Mary, a life built around connections that nourished rather than depleted me. I didn't attend the wedding. According to Patrick, who did go, my mother spent much of the reception explaining my absence to curious relatives, casting herself as the long-suffering parent of an ungrateful son. Brian and Ashley departed for their honeymoon in Hawaii, a trip largely funded by my mother, and life continued. On what would have been my grandmother's 85th birthday, I made her special casserole and invited Sarah over for dinner. As we enjoyed the meal, I shared stories about Grandma Margaret, her wisdom, her quiet strength, her ability to love without keeping score. She sounds like an amazing woman, Sarah said, reaching for my hand across the table. I think she'd be proud of how far you've come this year. I squeezed her hand gently. I think so too. She always used to tell me that sometimes the hardest ingredient to find is the courage to know your own worth. The journey from that Christmas dinner table to this moment hadn't been easy or linear. There had been days of doubt, moments of grief. For the maternal relationship, I'd never have times when the old patterns of thinking threatened to pull me back into familiar dysfunction. But with each passing month, the weight I'd carried for decades grew lighter. I no longer needed my mother's approval to validate my existence. I no longer measured my worth by my place at her table. The empty plate that had once symbolized my exclusion now represented freedom, the space to build something new, something healthier, something truly nourishing. As summer turned to fall, I received a tentative email from Brian. His new marriage was already showing strains, particularly around his mother's constant presence and opinions. I never realized how much Mom interferes until Ashley started pointing it out, he wrote. I guess maybe you weren't wrong about everything. It wasn't an apology, not really. But it was a crack in the facade, a small recognition that perhaps our family dynamic wasn't as perfect as he'd always believed. I responded with kindness but maintained my boundaries, offering support without abandoning the self-respect I'd worked so hard to develop. When Thanksgiving approached, I hosted dinner in my apartment for the first time. Sarah, Mike, and Daniela, two colleagues from work, Uncle Robert and Aunt Mary, and even Patrick, who drove in from college. The table was crowded, the conversation lively, the food abundant, including, of course, my grandmother's casserole. No one's plate was forgotten. No one was made to feel less worthy of nourishment than anyone else. No one left hungry, for food or for acceptance. Sometimes the empty plate at a holiday table is the most powerful gift you can receive. It shows you exactly where you stand, removes all doubt, and presents you with a choice. Continue accepting scraps from a feast to which others are fully invited, or rise with dignity and find your own table, one where your presence is celebrated rather than merely tolerated. I chose the latter, and in doing so discovered that family isn't defined by obligation genetics or shared history alone. True family is created through respect, mutual care, and the simple, profound act of making space for each other, at the table and in our hearts. Has your family ever made you feel like an unwelcome guest rather than a cherished member? Share your experience in the comments below. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in these struggles is the first step toward healing. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about finding strength in difficult situations. Remember, the family we choose can be just as meaningful as the family we're born into. Thank you for being part of my chosen family today, and I wish you a holiday season filled with tables where you are truly welcome.